Então, em primeiro lugar, quero passar a palavra para Lessig, que eu já prestei uma homenagem. Chegou de manhã, já vai de tarde, vem em homenagem à nossa reunião, então merece uma salva de palmas antes de falar. Oi. Gil, chega um pouquinho para o lado aí.
Okay, it's wonderful to be here, but you guys are obviously having too much fun. It's too exciting. So they decided to have a boring law professor speak. So that's my job, to be the boring law professor who speaks. And I want to talk about So I want to talk about this idea of the democracy crisis. If in 1945 you had gathered together the leaders of the world and said, what does the world need now? You know, kind of like the Dion song, what does the world need now? What everybody would have said that the world need now was democracy. And in fact, what the world got for the last 70 years was more and more democracy. And the idea was we would have rule by the people, but in fact, what we've had is not so much rule by the people. Democracy has failed around the world. Democracy has been corrupted. The global dissatisfaction with democracy has never been higher. We are in the middle of a democracy crisis around the world. And what I want to do here is I want to spend just a couple minutes to understand the source. I want to give it a name. I want to give you a name for this democracy crisis.
Vocês tiveram o sistema de tradução previsto? Eu falo para o público. Então vocês vão ter tradução. Vocês estão com os fones aí?
Quase ninguém.
Por que vocês não pegaram os fones para a tradução? Bom, então não é melhor alguém ir traduzindo aqui para vocês, né? Tem alguém? Pega um dos tradutores que estão na cabine e bota um microfone aqui para eles traduzirem para o público. I'm asking one of the translators in the cabin to come here with a mic and translate, you know, what you talk to them. Yeah, back and forth. Okay?
Professor Larry, pode continuar, por favor.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so what you don't know is that John and I went to college together and I haven't seen him in 30 years.
Vocês que não sabem e não vai acreditar é que Larry e eu, nós fizemos faculdade juntos e não vimos em 30 anos.
All right, let's start. Okay, so if we could fly from this place here,
se pudéssemos voar daqui para
5,600 miles north to El Paso, Texas, and then go back 90 years in El Paso, Texas.
Se pudermos voar 56.000 milhas para norte até El Paso, Texas, e voltar em tempo 90 anos,
we could meet this guy. His name's Nixon, Lawrence Nixon. And Lawrence Nixon moved to El Paso in 1910.
podemos encontrar Lawrence Nixon, que se mudou para El Paso em 1910.
And every 2 years, he would vote. He would walk down to his polling place and he would vote until 1924, when he was told he was not allowed to vote.
Cada 2 anos ele votou, mas de repente em 1924 ele foi informado que não podia mais votar.
And when he was told he couldn't vote, the reason he couldn't vote was that Texas, in America, Texas, had a law that said only white people could vote. Only whites would vote, all blacks were excluded.
E por que ele não podia votar? E porque ele foi informado que na lei da Texas, naquela época, só pessoas brancas podiam votar.
So Texas had a two-stage democracy. There was a general election, but before that there was a white primary. And to run in the general election, you had to do well in the white primary. That's the only way you could win.
A Texas, na época, tiveram programa de votação de 2 etapas. A primeira primária teve que passar primeiro para uma votação só de pessoas brancas. Então, para conseguir na segunda etapa, teve que ter êxito na primeira etapa.
So 16% were excluded in this critical first step, with the consequence, obviously, of producing a democracy responsive to whites only.
16% foram, assim, sistematicamente excluídas. E aí não teve democracy.
So what Texas did was actually an idea that had been thought of by this man, maybe the greatest American philosopher, a man named Boss Tweed.
O que o Texas fez, eles adotaram algo que o filósofo Lawrence Mead decidiu fazer.
And Boss Tweed used to say, I don't care who does the electing, as long as I do the nominating.
Ele falou, não me importa quem elege, eu quero nomear.
And this idea that you control the nomination, I want to call Tweedism.
Assim, para controlar quem seja nomeada, passa a chamar Tweedism.
So Tweedism is any of these two-stage democracies where the Tweeds control the first stage, and to be able to run in the general election, you have to please those Tweeds.
Então, Tweedism é nada mais que ter 2 etapas, onde ter controle já na primeira etapa.
With the consequence, obviously, of producing a democracy responsive to the Tweeds only.
E assim, a democracy vai atender aos Tweeds.
This is Tweedism, and when you see Tweedism, you will see Tweedism everywhere. Think about what happened in Hong Kong last year, as hundreds of thousands of people turned out to protest the government in Hong Kong.
Quando você pensar em Tweedism existe em todo lugar. Imagina no Hong Kong, onde teve 100,000 pessoas que saíram para fazer algo igual.
So they were fighting in Hong Kong for a principle that had been corrupted by a law, the law that was designed to pick the chief executive or the governor. And that law said this.
Eles estavam lutando para uma forma para eleger governador. E assim eles promoveram uma lei, e esta lei estipulou o seguinte.
They said the aim was the chief executive by a nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee.
O objetivo definitivo é para ter comitê de nomeação que vai nomear as pessoas a serem votadas.
So the two-stage democracy, there's an election, but there's a committee that picks the people who are allowed to run in that election. And to be able to run, you had to do well in that committee.
Ou seja, neste sistema de 2 etapas, tem que ter primeiro processo de nomeação. Para poder ser eleito, tem que passar primeiro pelo comitê de nomeação.
But here's the thing, the committee was comprised of just 1,200 citizens, which out of a population of 7 million meant about 0.02%, which is, as you can see, a really tiny number. This is what 0.02% looks like against the population of all of Hong Kong.
Só que o comitê de nomeação, no caso do Hong Kong, foi muito pequeno. 1.200, 7 milhões. Imagina a percentagem, muito baixo.
Okay, so this tiny fraction produced a filter, what the Hong Kong people said would be a biased filter, because the 0.02% would be dominated by a pro-Beijing business and political elite.
Ou seja, esta pequena fração de 0,02% foi preconceituado, porque assim representaria grupo de elite de negócios e políticos, aí não seria representativo.
So 99.98% excluded from this critical first step, with the consequence, obviously, of producing a democracy responsive to China only.
Então, por resultado, como mais que 99% estavam excluídos, aí esta pequena fração estava lá mais para atender os interesses da China.
Okay, these cases are obvious. This should be obvious too.
Estes casos são óbvios.
In America, we take it for granted that campaigns will be privately funded.
Nos Estados Unidos, é suposto que campanhas são financiadas de fontes privadas ou particulares.
But funding of campaigns is its own contest. Funding is its own primary.
Mas funding em si é jogo, é concurso que tem como se fosse primário também.
Funding takes time. Members of Congress and candidates for Congress spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress or to get their party back into power.
Gerar recursos para uma campanha demora. Deputados, congressistas levam 30 a 70% do seu tempo para angariar recursos para uma campanha para ser eleito.
B.F. Skinner gave us this image of the Skinner box, where any stupid animal could learn which buttons it needed to push to get the sustenance it needs to survive.
O Leonard Skinner desenvolveu esta caixa para mostrar pássaro criando buracos para poder sobreviver.
This is the picture of the life of the modern American congressperson as they learn which buttons they must to push in order for them to survive or their campaign to flourish.
Esta imagem, então, apresenta congressista que busca, de uma forma, tocando buracos para conseguir a sua própria reexistência.
This life has an effect. As they live this life, they develop a sixth sense, a constant awareness about how what they do might affect their ability to raise money.
Esta vida, assim, tem efeito. Este efeito é sexto sentido. E este sexto sentido é uma forma para sentir como sobreviver.
Leslie Byrne, a Democrat, member of Congress from Virginia, said when she went to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, always lean to the green. Then to clarify, she went on, he was not an environmentalist.
É uma deputada de estado que ela falou tem que sempre inclinar para o lado verde. Ou seja, falou que ele não era alguém para ambiente.
Okay, so this is a primary too, the money primary, not a white primary, but a green primary, as they spend their time raising money to be able to run in this general election. They must do well in that green primary. So who are these funders? Who are the people that actually support the candidates in this green primary?
Então, esta eleição primária não é branca como era, mas agora verde. Mas quem é as pessoas que patrocinam e financiam esta primária?
Well, in America, the biggest funders of political campaigns in the last election cycle, the top 100, gave as much as the bottom 4.75 million contributors combined.
Os maiores 100 pessoas que deram recursos fizeram tanto que tudo embaixo de 4,75 milhões.
And in this election cycle, 158 families in America have given half the amount of money that's been contributed to the presidential super PACs and campaigns.
Neste ciclo de eleição atual, apenas 150 famílias está dando a maior fonte de todos os recursos
That's not
para
a, sorry.
a eleição.
That's not a democracy, that's a banana republic democracy. That's what America's democracy has become, that banana republic.
Este não é democracia. Este é uma república de banana. É isto que a democracia se tornou nos Estados Unidos.
Okay, so those are the biggest funders, but think about the relevant funders, people who give enough to matter. How many of those funders are there in this first step of the Green primary?
Estes são as maiores fontes de patrocínio. Mas quantos financiadores relativos também tem?
So if you think about those who give the maximum amount to one candidate, turns out, sorry,
Aqueles que dão o mais possível para determinado candidato.
turns out last cycle there was 57,874 Americans who gave the maximum amount to one candidate.
No último ciclo de eleição, tiveram 57.874 pessoas que conseguiram dar o máximo possível para financiar a campanha.
So 57,874 turns out to be 0.02% of America. 0.02% of America dominating this first stage in this two-stage election process.
Então, estes 57.784 pessoas representam 0,02% da população, aí influenciando este ciclo de eleição.
This tiny fraction of the 1%, we could say a Chinese fraction of the 1% dominating this first stage with the consequence, obviously, of producing a democracy responsive to the funders only.
E assim é como uma fração chinesa, uma pequena fatia aí atendendo só os interesses das pessoas financiando.
As one study from Princeton put it, when the economic preferences of the economic elites and the stands of organized interest groups are controlled for,
Estudo na faculdade da Universidade de Princeton até fez uma conclusão que quando as preferências das elites econômicas estão para o interesse organizado,
the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, non-zero, statistically non-significant impact on public policy.
assim estas preferências do cidadão americano na média têm apenas uma pequenininha, quase zero, insignificativa estatisticamente influência nas políticas públicas.
This is supposed to be the picture of American democracy. There we are, an American driving the bus, we the citizen. This is our system, right? This is the reality of America's democracy. The steering wheel has become removed from the bus. We don't drive the bus anymore. The bus is driven for us. That is what the Tweeds do in a system of Tweedism.
Essa é uma imagem da democracia nos Estados Unidos. É um cidadão americano dirigindo ônibus, só que o volante saiu. Aí o bus dirige sozinho.
Okay, that's Tweedism. I want you to think about three facts and then I'm going to stop. Number one, Tweedism is corruption.
Ok, este é Tweedism. Tweedism, assim, tem três fatos. Fato corrupção.
It's not necessarily bribery. I'm not saying it's necessarily a crime. I'm not talking about the things that Transparency International talks about when it marks the whole world as corrupt. What I'm talking about is systemic corruption, a corruption of the system of representative democracy.
E não necessariamente suborno, nem crime, mas é uma corrupção sistêmica que acaba afetando a democracia representativa no modo geral.
And we have to acknowledge that legal and illegal corruption both cheat democracy, and in this sense, the illegal corruption, which is marked by this big red sign, is matched by the legal corruption, especially in democracies like the United States, that defeat and destroy the idea of democracy.
E esta corrupção ilegal acaba infectando o mundo. E esta imagem mostra o degrau de quanto esta corrupção assim afeta a democracia.
That's point one. Point two, tweedism feeds inequality.
Ponto 2. O fato 2 do tweedism é que... Repete? Repeat, what is it?
Inequality.
A corrupção acaba criando inigualdade.
This unequal status of citizens inside this democracy, and in the United States, the unequal vote, not in the ballot election, but in the money election, not in the general election, but in this green primary.
Este sistema de inigualdade acaba afetando votos, porque assim o voto está inigual.
This unequal power produces unequal citizens that destroys the very idea, the basic premise of the notion of a representative democracy.
Este poder inigual gera, em sua vez, cidadãos iniguais, e isto acaba com o sistema de democracia representativa.
And number three, this fight against tweedism is just one expression of this global anti-corruption movement that has exploded all across the world.
Esta luta contra o tweedism é só exemplo de movimento mundial de combater corrupção.
These are different techniques in these different countries of corruption, but they all are versions of tweedism. All are examples of a democracy captured by the few in a system where power was meant for the many.
Este é síntoma do tweedism, que assim o que teria para muitos acaba sendo só os interesses de poucos com poder.
And to fight that tweedism, what we need is a different kind of politics.
Para lutar contra o tweedism, precisamos uma política de uma natureza diferente.
The Chatterati of the world say that the politics in the world is divided between the left side and the right side.
A Chatterati do mundo que fala que a política está dividindo entre o lado esquerdo e o lado direito.
But that's not right. Politics in the world is divided between the inside and the outside.
Mas isto não é verdade. Política, em realidade, é dividido entre o lado por dentro e o lado por fora.
And the outside has its own politics. We could call it exopolitics. It means the politics, not of the politicians, but a kind of citizen politics that would be necessary to take on this corruption and this power that needs to be changed.
Este lado de fora para o político externo, como se fosse expo política, é uma forma para lutar em nome de todos os cidadãos, para assim empoderar os cidadãos.
These are citizens demanding that politics change. And who are these citizens? These citizens, here's the point. Here's the whole reason I flew 12 hours to come talk for 20 minutes here in Brazil. These citizens, who are these citizens?
Quem são estes cidadãos? Estes cidadãos é a razão que o professor Larry pegou voo de 12 horas para vir aqui e falar para vocês quem são estes cidadãos.
These citizens have to be you. They have to be you. They have to be you everywhere, but you as in the youth of the world, especially in the United States.
Esses cidadãos têm que ser vocês, têm que ser jovens, em todo lugar, Estados Unidos e o resto do mundo.
Because here's the fact. the sad fact that this American comes to say.
É fato triste que acontece.
We in America have lost the capacity to govern.
Estados Unidos perdeu a capacidade de governar.
Our government is deeply corrupted, and our government is increasingly insane. And our government will only ever come back to a place of sanity if it is brought back by the wisdom, by the integrity, by the passion of people like you demanding that sanity come back to the most powerful nation in the world.
Nosso governo é totalmente insano e corrupto. É a única forma para devolver esta sanidade e se vocês, as pessoas, conseguem com sabedoria, paixão, trazer esta sanidade de volta.
We are a drunken grizzly bear, the United States, and we will do enormous damage if we can't find a way back to these very basic principles of democracy again.
Nós somos urso bêbado grande e aí só podemos reverter a situação se a gente retoma controle da situação.
Now you can fight this corruption. You here with your government and you inspiring people around the world to fight it around the world, including in our government. And you can fight this here.
Vocês podem entrar nesta luta. Vocês aqui no seu governo e sistema podem também combater contra a corrupção.
And it's an idea that after my friend John has translated it for you, it's even expressible in a hashtag, this idea.
Esta ideia pode ser manifestado até numa hashtag.
Around the world, we failed democracies need to rally to a single idea. Tweedism, no.
No mundo inteiro, estas democracias falidas têm que fazer este tweedism não.
Democracy, yes.
Democracy, sim.
Thank you very much.
Obrigado, valeu.